The world is hurting right now, and it's time to rise up. As we lift ourselves up in body, mind, and spirit, we can reach out to others and be a light in a sea of darkness. Welcome to the Movement for Global Health with your host, Dr. Mary Zennett.
Richard Villasana is the founder of Forever Homes for Foster Kids. He is a leading international expert on immigration issues and foster families. As a proud Navy veteran, Richard has been featured on CNN International, Associated Press, ABC TV, Wish TV, Costco Connections, and the Washington Post. He is a columnist with Foster Focus magazine, and he is an international speaker. For 3 decades, his nonprofit has worked with government agencies across the country to find families for foster and immigration children to create a permanent home. He is the author of a book, Do No Harm, about children separated at the Mexico-U.S. border from 2017 through 2021 and the foster care crisis. It is an absolute privilege for us to welcome Richard to the show today.
Thank you for having me, Mary.
Very, very pleased. I'll just put a little plug for your book. I couldn't put it down. It was one of those.
Wow, wow, that's great to hear.
I thank you so much for all the work you have put into all this. So let's cut right to it. How did you get started working with helping foster children?
Well, first, someone had to let me know that I had a talent to find people, and that was my mentor. And one of the stories I love to tell is that we were working together. And this is really important, that we had worked together for some time. I knew his habits, I knew his languaging.
Yeah.
And so one day he comes to my desk, he drops off a piece of paper. I'm looking at it and said, "What's this?" He says, "I want you to find Barry Johnson." "Who's Barry Johnson?" He said, "Well, he works for the Department of Commerce and he's in Washington, D.C. And, well, it's all the information I have. Let's see what you could do." So I come back to his desk later and I drop the piece of paper off. And he looks at it and says, "What's this?" "The phone number." "Whose phone number?" "For Mr. Johnson." And he looks at his watch and he says, "That was 5 minutes ago." And I thought he was upset because I took so long. I realized he was in shock because I only took 5 minutes. And this is pre-Google. So there was no search engine to do this. And I'm like, "Job done. I'm ready to get back to my desk." And he's like, "Stop. You're not leaving until you explain how you did this." So I told him, I made 3 phone calls. And in 3 phone calls, I got the number. And again, I'm thinking, okay, I've told my story. I got work to do. I'm heading back. And he said, "You're not listening to me." And I'm like, okay. So I kind of chill, come back to the desk. Okay. What am I missing? He said, "Look, you know who I am." And my mentor did business with foreign governments, the U.S. government, Department of Defense, Fortune 500 companies. This guy is the guy you see flying away off of rooftops in helicopters. He was the guy. And he said, "With my background, when I tell you that I've never met anyone who can do what you just did, that means something." I said, "Well, I do it all the time." He said, "It doesn't matter. doesn't make it any less important, doesn't mean it's not a valuable skill. And because I knew him and respected him,
Right.
I listened. And that was so critical because all of us have that superpower, that thing we do so well and so easily, but we don't have someone who stops us and say, look, this is your dream work, go for it. I got lucky. So he pointed that out to me. And that was one of a few times that he pointed that out to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I paid attention. So again, I had done that for other people. I'd done that for our company, and the word started to get out. And so I started getting associates saying, can you find my brother? Haven't seen him in 10 years. Sure. And then all of a sudden I got foster care agencies calling me up saying, look, I hear you do work in Mexico. Yeah. Well, we have a child and we want you to find their father. I'm like, well, I'm doing international business. I don't really do that. But I started to do that and I got so many calls, I finally decided maybe this is what I should be doing. And that's how I got involved. And I don't know who leaked it. Just somehow these agencies heard about me and started calling me up, and the word got out, and we started handling foster children cases.
Oh, that's absolutely incredible. Now, let's talk about foster children and foster care. What do you see as some of the worst problems for our children that are in foster care?
Oh, there are many. I would say the biggest one is that 1 out of 3 children are either physically or sexually abused while they're in foster care. Now, keep in mind, the children who come into foster care, it's only 1 out of 5. And these are rounded numbers for that person,
Right.
But basically it's 1 out of 5, but then it drops to 1 out of 3 being abused while they're in foster care. Number 2, foster care was never created to be a long-term solution. No child expert thinks that the government is a better parent than an adult. And then 3, we have these children going into group homes, institutional environments. They're unmanaged, they're privately run. Nobody can come in and look at their books. No one's able to come in and see what they're doing to the children. And there's lots of abuses. There's lots of financial abuse where the system is getting overcharged hundreds, millions of dollars, and it's not going to the children. And I'd say the last thing is that they move about every 2 years. Think about that. You're at home, you're settled in, you've opened up the last box, and someone says, oh, it's been 6 months. It's time for you to move. And you've got to do it all over again. New school. That means maybe you got to move all your courses over. Maybe not. Maybe you're taking math for the 3rd time. All of this impacting the child because of the constant instability, and worse, every time they move, for most children, it's, you didn't love me enough. My foster parent didn't love me. And it's not the foster parent's fault.
It's not.
It's not. And I do want to say this. We have thousands and thousands of caseworkers and foster parents and adoptive parents who come in for the right reason and do it right and do their best. Sometimes doing their best is not enough. Just because of the situation and what the child has gone through, but they come in with the right intention. So the system itself has problems, but it's not because we don't have people who are trying their best to do what's best for these kids.
Absolutely. But I'll tell you, as somebody that has children and works with children, when I hear the numbers of these children that are abused, physically or sexually, okay, to me, that's absolutely unconscionable. Unconscionable that many children are abused. And then it goes all down from here, downhill from there.
It is terrible. And one of the reasons we have that kind of a problem, there's actually 3. Number 1, there's not enough money. So we've got people in Congress right now who are looking to cut, and one of the things they're looking to cut is the money that goes to welfare to help children. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. I really don't. there has to be enough money consistently for children. If they're our future, we need to treat them like our future and give the money so they can be cared for properly and a permanent family can be found for them. That's number one. Number two, there has to be training. These caseworkers come in, and I'm going to talk about another feature in a moment. They don't have a particular background or training, and because of that, they're not able to do the best job possible, and there's lack of accountability. And that's killing the foster care system because people can do whatever they want to. We have more than 3,000 counties in this country, and foster care is run at the county level. And that means we have 3,000 plus counties doing whatever they want to because they can all do it their own way. There's not a national system or process. So we've got all these counties doing it. The one to the left can be doing great adoption and terrible other things. And the one in the middle could be doing terrible adoption, but they're great with transitional programs for kids who are 18. And then the other one, fabulous foster care program for the parents, for getting the foster parents in.
Right.
But it's not like they're all talking to each other and sharing and they're all growing together. It's not.
No. And it could be one state. I've had this experience where in one county, it's pretty decent, and in one county, it's just awful.
Exactly. And I have to tell people when they write me, because we're very active on social media, they'll say, what about, and I have to point out, look, it could just be your county. You just in the wrong place because the one right next door could be fabulous. And
people need to know that.
They do. I mean, these are, we say these things, but people do need to understand, yes, there are good people in foster care. There are people working hard, judges and caseworkers and regular adults. There are bad things happening too. That's what you do in a business. You find the problems and you fix them.
Exactly. Well, and speaking of that, how does your organization help foster children?
That's a great question. We do something called family finding. And what that simply means is when a child comes into foster care, if there's not a relative nearby who can take the child in, the agencies are required by state and federal law that within 30 days, they will notify all of the child's relatives, aunts, uncles, grandparents, fifth cousins, all of them. Because the idea is simple. You find as many relatives as possible, someone will step up and take in the child. But you got to do it wide. You can't do it with one or two because they both may have a situation where they simply can't or don't want to. So family finding is really critical, and it is so important that in 2016, when California was flush with money, they set aside millions of dollars to give to each county. And one of the 4 areas they could spend that money on was specifically family finding.
Wow.
And let me step into family finding a little bit more. Here's the solution. We have more than 400,000 children coming into foster care every year, but we're not doing family finding because one, none of the colleges in this country teach family finding. There's not one course that has it listed. It's not even part of a coursework. So they come all out, not have at the bachelor's and master's degree, never having heard of family finding. Then we have studies who say that these people get maybe, this is the good side, 2 weeks of training before they're let loose to handle a child with trauma. Do you know your cable operator, the person answering a phone for your cable company, gets 3 to 4 times more training than someone who is going to deal with a traumatized child? That's disgusting.
It is. It is. But these children, their needs are so complex. How can you begin to even interact with the child or evaluate what relatives would be best served to help the child if you don't understand? You've never been trained.
Absolutely. And because they're not trained in family finding, they don't do it. So family finding is cheap. You keep a child in foster care for a month, it could cost anywhere from $3,000 to $12,000. You get a child out 1 month early, it easily paid for family finding. Plus, studies show child plays with relatives, even distant relatives. In general, they do better at school, better self-image, better mentally, psychologically. They graduate at a higher rate. They go to college at a higher rate. They interact socially much better than those kids of the same age who are still in foster care. So we got all of these benefits from family finding, and we have agencies who are not doing it. And we do not have the training out there to do family finding. And that's what we specialize in. We take the most desperate cases, kids who are 17 years old, just months away from aging out and being on the street, and we find their relatives in the U.S., and we locate their relatives that are living anywhere in Latin America. I have done cases in Brazil, Dominican Republic, Mexico, of course, Guatemala, El Salvador. We're all over the place. And we do it well at a rate. Lately, our success rate has been 91% or better. That's better than finding the relatives within the U.S. by other agencies. And we do that internationally. So it is a process that pays for itself. It is a process. It's like putting $1 in and you get $50 back. It's a no-brainer that our government, our counties are not doing. It's a simple, straightforward solution that is not being utilized across this country for the sake of our children.
So when you talk about this process, that means the children will be placed permanently, is that right, in with the family that you find and designate?
So I'm actually going to give you a high-profile case, Simone Biles. We all know Simone, Olympic goddess, and I think she's the most decorated Olympian we've ever had. So she was in foster care with some of her siblings, and her grandparents came and they pulled her out of foster care. And when she went with her grandparents, that put her into kinship care. So she hasn't been adopted yet, but she is now staying with her grandparents. And that stable lifestyle, look where she is. But she had that stable lifestyle, that love that everyone needs. She had it. And look what she did with it. And yes, at some point she got adopted. And so they may adopt the child, they may not adopt the child. Many do. But there's still, the big thing is that the stability, the family love, the family pressure that we know that keeps us from doing things that we might thought about, but we realize it really would not have been a good thing if we did it. And we all need that. We all needed that when we were growing up.
Yes. And I find a lot of these, probably most of these children have such abandonment issues anyway. And that somewhere deep in their hearts, it's like, you know what, somebody left me. And this puts a permanency. It helps really help begin that process of healing the heart, that, wow, I'm loved. I have a sense of belonging. I belong to a family. It seems so basic, but it's not, because you see the dilemma of all these poor kids that just don't have that.
Again, unfortunately, look, family finding is not the silver bullet. It's not the magic wand. There will always be children who need transitional programs. There'll be children who need special psychiatric counseling and treatment. But for many, many children, family finding is the solution. It's just not being done. There's an aunt out there right now that would take in a child. I have worked cases where we found an absent father. And once he found out, this one case in particular, he was in Puerto Rico. He left Puerto Rico, flew to the Northeast United States where his daughter was at the time in foster care, set up a new life up there so he could take his daughter and have her with him. Now that's love. And that's what's missing out there because we're not looking for the parents.
Exactly.
And this is something that there are federal laws that say you have to do this. These agencies are breaking the law.
Mhm.
What they've done is we have very weak languaging that says you will do a reasonable search. Well, what's
Mm.
reasonable? Reasonable really is subjective. Reasonable could be
Right.
5 phone calls to a number and you got voicemail, and the counties will go to the court and say, well, we tried our best.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, the judges will run with that. So another change that has to happen, the judges need to be educated to understand, no, that's not reasonable. That was lazy. That was a token effort.
Right.
Now people in the industry are talking about a thorough family finding. That's what
Mhm.
we do. We do an
Mhm.
exhaustive family finding. That's why we have the success level we do,
Right.
because we go after it and we don't stop until it's clear that person doesn't live where we think they do. And at that point,
Mhm. Mhm.
we
Mhm.
can't do magic. So,
Right.
but family finding gives so many benefits to those children. And to what you just said, every time these children leave a home, they're constantly thinking, why didn't you fight for me?
Exactly.
Even though that may not have been a possibility for the parent, for the
Mhm.
foster
Oh,
parents.
absolutely. Absolutely. Right. But that abandonment, that pain, that hole in their hearts, it's so huge. It's such a void. And then we see them trying to fill this void with all this negative behavior, acting out on the streets. I mean, it's really scary today. A lot of these kids are on the streets or they run. It's like, this abandonment, but I'm going to run and get themselves in all kinds of trouble. It's really sad.
It is, and you touched on a very sensitive and unknown topic, which is every day, roughly 55 children run away from their foster home.
Mm-hmm.
And the police have said the vast majority are never found. Either
Oh.
the foster parents don't call it in,
Mm-hmm.
or the agency. This was a big story years ago in Oklahoma,
Mm-hmm.
where a teenager had left the foster home,
Right.
and this was a group home. It was run by the county. Nobody called it into the police. And when they were questioned, they said, well,
Right.
did you want me to, hold the child? Well, of course not. But you didn't call anybody. Well,
Mm-hmm.
no. And his reasoning was it wasn't in the handbook. This is an adult paid to take care of children, but it had to be in the handbook that they pick
Oh.
the phone up and say, I don't have a child.
Yeah.
They've run away.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the level of incompetence we have because of lack of training and lack of accountability and lack of good management.
Wow. Wow. And like you say, 55 kids, okay, they run away a day, per day. Most are never found.
That's right. It's a shocking figure.
It is a shocking figure because they're on the streets. And I don't know, I can tell you just from the line of work that I do, I'm a psychiatrist. So I talk to tons of people, tons of families, and the streets are not safe. They're not what they used to be years ago. Okay, kid was running, somebody would say, wait a minute, what's wrong with this? And let's find this kid. And let's get him back home, blah, blah, blah. We don't have that anymore. And the crime, the violence, and the poor kids get caught into a very, very, I mean, it's life threatening. It's life threatening. So that is so sad. But the great news of what you're doing, family finding, that cuts right through, cuts to the chase. It's like, wait a minute. We work to find a family that the child can stay with, feel like they
Absolutely.
belong and flourish.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the bottom line. And here's the other part. For those children we can't find family members for, or I have had some cases where the family said, no, I don't want the child.
Mm-hmm.
There's too much trauma going on.
Right.
And I'm not going to judge them because they may not have the capability to handle the situation. So
Exactly.
at least they will say lovingly stepped away. And in those cases, by doing this work, it also allows the system to terminate parental rights
Mm-hmm.
because they've done the process that they're supposed to do. Because I
Exactly.
have seen adoption cases held up because they didn't do
Exactly.
the search. And I'll kind of tell you a quick story about that. We had a case, it was up in Wisconsin. And when we got
Mhm.
the email, we could tell that this was like, I have to send you this email, but I don't believe this is going to work at all. Because there was just that feeling through the messaging that there was no confidence that family finding was going to work, that family
Right.
finding internationally was going to work. So why even try? And unfortunately, this is something that is true for many counties. They don't believe that international family finding will work. So it's a waste of time, a waste of money. Why do it? But they came to me and they said, look, we have 4 siblings. 2 were very young, so the foster parents were able to adopt them. Okay.
Mhm.
But the other 2, they're old enough now that the court requires us to find the father, and the father lives in Guatemala.
Mhm.
And so we need you to go look and see if you can find him. I
Right.
said, okay, yeah, we'll do it. But we got 30 days before we have to go to court. Otherwise, you're going to kick this down the road another 4 months. And it's already been a year that these siblings have been separated as far as being a family
Right.
from their foster parents. So,
Mhm.
okay, took it on, got back within 30 days, got the report. The report got passed to the judge. And in this case, the father was from an indigenous community.
Okay.
So it's like, for people who aren't used to that concept, it's, and I'm trying to think of a more positive term, but it would be kind of like someone who's homeless in the sense of they're not connected to normal society, phones, they're not interacting. They're in their own group. Maybe a commune might be a better analogy, where they're just not off the grid. And so the judge looked at that and said, look, we also have a challenge. This father has come across several times, has given us different names, at least 2 different birth dates. We love the work you did, but we're not going to continue. I think your work has been thorough enough. We're going to run with it that you did not find him. You found possible relatives, but we may be going in the wrong direction because of all this misinformation. Terminate his parental rights, get this adoption going. Everybody was floored, especially the caseworker. She wrote back this glowing email about, oh my God, I can't believe it. It worked. I can't believe these kids are going to get adopted now. They were in shock. But that's what family finding can do for a child. It can take a blocked adoption that has been out there for maybe months or even years.
Yes. Yes.
And now they have the legal requirements in place because we found or didn't find the relative, the father or mother, and they either said yes or no, and the parental rights can be terminated if that's the case, and it moves on. And we have done that for lots of adoptions. So it's, family finding isn't only for one area, it impacts a child in many ways.
Wow. Wow. And you've done this work for how many years?
3 decades.
Wow. I think you could say you've got some great experience there.
Sorry,
And
when I was 10. Yep.
looking at it, the outcomes, I can only assume that the outcomes for the kids are so much better than had you not done your work.
I'd certainly like to hope so. Again, there is no, and I say this because there's always that person who's looking for 100%. Oh, that's unrealistic. Nothing's 100%.
Mhm.
But this is an incredibly powerful process
Mhm.
for agencies to use that they're not using, and they're not using to the best extent that it can be used.
Exactly.
And so this is something that has to be
Wow.
taught. There has to be more continuous training on this.
Mhm.
Judges need to be trained to know
Yes.
and understand family
Yes.
finding and the power of it. And there needs to be political will to put the money out there. So there is
Yes.
training. It just all goes down the line. We have to care for these kids.
Exactly. Well, and the funds need to go for the children. A lot of these, just as a general principle, there's all this money, but is it being used for the children? I have seen so many examples where it's not.
Oh, absolutely. We all know of the school that needs a new classroom or needs air conditioning or needs something in particular. And the next thing we know, the football team got it.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have suffered through this. And that's what's happening here. Like you said, a lot of this money comes in, it's earmarked. And one of those activities is family fighting. But that money somehow seems to find its way into the general slush fund and to go other places because too many counties in this country,
Yes.
not only just to my nonprofit, but for those who work domestically, will say, we don't have any money. We can't afford you. And look, resources, experience, that it takes time, and time is money. There's a cost to everything. And so that cost has to be covered. Doesn't matter whether it's done by a nonprofit or it's done by the county. There has to be X amount of money so that that work can be done. And that's not happening in the richest country in the world. It's not happening.
Yeah. It's just unconscionable. Now, let's move into what would you like to inspire our listeners to do?
That's a great question. And I actually cover that in my book, Do No Harm. And there's a chapter. All it is dedicated to that. And here's the book itself. And there's so many ways. Someone could spend 5 minutes and just go to a Facebook page that is about foster care, could like the page, share the stories, quick and easy, they're done. They can get more involved. They could donate. They could do a fundraiser. Look, Facebook fundraisers take 2 minutes. They're quick and easy. Send out an invite. It does it on almost automatically, and let people donate and help a nonprofit. Because I'm going to tell you, there are many, many nonprofits who are doing the family finding work because the counties have farmed it out and have made contracts, and that's okay. Because if the counties don't have the expertise, there are nonprofits that do, just like mine. There are other nonprofits that are expert at going to search engines and finding a child's family and their relatives quickly and economically. So that's a good deal. Let the experts do it. Get it done fast. Help a nonprofit. Become a foster parent. If you don't want to be a full-time foster parent, offer to do respite care so that so that couple who's been working with this foster child, they need a breather. They want to just take a night off and not have to worry about the child, or maybe a weekend. Someone can step in and be approved and be vetted and become a respite care. They could work with CASA. CASA is a little bit more of a commitment. That's where they get training, and they are now volunteer, and for 10 to 15 hours a month, they're focused on one child and being the voice of that child when that child's in court. So that's another possibility. Maybe a little bit too much for some people, but again, there are all these ways that people could help. They could give, their businesses could give. There are businesses out there right now, and I don't mind calling this one out, Wells Fargo, where they have a program where you can work and the employee earns money, and Wells Fargo will cut a check and send it to their favorite nonprofit. And we have received some of those checks, and they're nice to get a check like that because they're not $10. And we can actually do something with that and help many children. So businesses can help. If they're business owners, they can help that way. There's just so many ways. It's a matter of people saying, I want to help, not we'll tell you how. The how is the easy. It's just people saying, I want to help a child and doing it.
Looking into their hearts. So by us having this broadcast, we're helping to raise awareness. That's what you're doing. Raise awareness of these problems which are catastrophic. It's reached a point in this country, like you say, richest country in the world, and so many children are so lost. running the streets. I mean, to me, one child lost is a tragedy. And look how many. Look how many. So you give people hope. You're giving them hope. It's like, yeah, I really do want to help. I can't do it all, but I can do something. Now, what about the children that are foster teens and then they age out of the system? Now, what happens with them?
Whew. That's a very complicated question, but I'll give you some quick answers on that. So number one, a child stays in foster care unless they run away. And at 18 years old, though, they got to make a choice. They can either stay, if there is this choice. Now, not all places have this choice, but if it's available, they can go into what they call transitional programs.
Okay.
And that is a bridge so that they're not completely on the street by themselves. Because this is what normally happens to a child who ages out. 18 years old, they may go to school, they may not go to school, but sometime that day, they're going to have to go into the place that they're living, and they usually get a garbage bag because they don't have suitcases or a backpack, and put their belongings in that garbage bag, and then they leave the home. They don't have dinner, or they may have dinner, but sometime during the day, they're out. That's their birthday gift. They lose their home. They lose their place where there's food, there's a safe place to study, because upwards of 30, in some places, 40% of the children have not graduated high school yet at 18 years old. So they're still juniors or seniors because they've moved around and had to repeat those courses once, twice, 3 times. And so now they've got all of that on them, their school books, and they have to move out and they have to have a place to live. And a lot of these kids, they don't leave with any money, and they don't have a place to stay. They become immediately homeless. And like you said, they're on the street now, where their books could get stolen if they have anything like a laptop. If they do have that, that's top of the list. That goes. They could get beaten. They could get killed. And that's the outcome for the kids who age out. 80% end up homeless. They still have to finish their high school education. They turn to crime, so they have money for food and for shelter, and that means they end up in prison. We even have a term for that. That's the foster care to prison pipeline, because they start doing crime, and guess what? They do crime, they get caught, they go to jail, they get involved with that particular type of people, and they come out, they do more crime because they, now they're an ex-convict. And it's just this nasty, terrible cycle. And then they end up in prison, or they're killed, or some kids become sex trafficking victims in as little as 6 hours.
Oh my God.
And again, these are things that are documented. This is not just hyperbole.
Oh, it's not at all. No.
Oh,
no, it's well documented. And I'll be honest with you, when you're in the community, you literally see these things going on, and it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. But like you say, in this country, I think it's something that each of us can ask ourselves, well, I can't do everything. What can I do? What can I do? Maybe we can talk to our employer about making a nice donation. Maybe we can work with some neighbors and we could provide some respite for some kids. I mean, there's something that all of us, each of us, can do.
Absolutely. This does not have to be one person carrying all the water. If everyone pitched in, I'll say this, I have had some posts on Facebook that have gotten reached more than 100,000 people. And I have thought, if they just gave $1, if they $1, we could have dozens of children that we could have helped with that $1 if everyone had just done that little. So it doesn't take much to make such an impact. And back to what you were saying about the children, there are transitional programs. But one of the things I wrote in my book is that these transitional programs almost create another foster care system, because you have to have people who take care of the kids mentally, their emotional issues, have to give them training. We have to find a place for them to live. Well, it sounds like foster care. So we've almost created a whole nother system for kids 18 to 21, 22, depends upon the state. Some are stretching out to 24. And even though they may have free tuition, they still have to get their books. They still have to eat. They still have to have a place to sleep. There are still other things that need to be done. And just because there is a transitional program, some run out of money. I know of one in particular who reached out to me and said, look, we don't find anyone. In 3 weeks, these kids are on the street because we ran out of our money. And that's it. We're the transitional housing in this area. So there's not that magic bullet. There's not one solution, which is why it's so critical that other people jump in and help. It's critical. And I will say this, for anyone who wants to know more, yes, my book does talk about the children who are separated at the Mexico-U.S. border. And by the way, we just found out that 1,000 of those children were U.S. born children, were U.S. citizens, and they were separated from their parents and caught up in all of that. And they have no idea where they are because they were put in foster care and there was no tracking. So we've got those children, but the second half of the book is heavy into everything we talked about: transitional programs, homelessness, sex trafficking, what happens when they age out, and this is almost more important, positive stories of successful outcomes where the child's life has been completely changed because of family finding. It's there. So this is not a doom and gloom and there's no hope. No, there's a lot of hope in what I wrote, because I realized we have to have hope, and there is a reason to have hope. This is not a hopeless situation. It just needs a few more people on board to help move this forward, both personally and with our politicians, to push for more funding and better oversight so that money's used properly and that these children get taken care of.
Exactly. Well, Richard, this is heroic what you've done, and we're going to close, but what inspired you to do this in the first place?
I come from a family of 9 kids, so I was the oldest. So I've always had a sense of responsibility. And, there is that saying, anyone who knows Marvel, anyone who knows Spider-Man, there's a very famous phrase that Stan Lee wrote: with great, powers comes great responsibility. And in my case, I am able to find people that no one else is able to find. I'm able to work with government agencies and go into the same places that other people have been and we're unsuccessful, and we have been successful and found a father, found a mother, found another relative. We have done it all throughout Latin America. And knowing that it's not like 7-Eleven where there's just another one down the street. Knowing this and how specialized our work is and the impact it can have on a child, I tell people, how could I not do what I'm doing? How could I walk away knowing there is not another agency? We have great agencies out there right now working on this, but we have closed the cases they couldn't.
Wow.
And if that's the case, how can I step away knowing that I would be leaving that hole for those children? Just one child, like you said, just one child. If we can help one more, and that's what drives me, is that one more, that we can change their life forever and give them a so much better life. That's what gets me up in the morning. That's what keeps me up at night, working away, and has me coming back year in and year out, day after day, doing this work.
Yes, it's such a privilege to have you here today, Richard. So let's hear again for our audience where they can learn more about you and the title of your book. Let's hear that from you.
All right. Well, the title of the book is Do No Harm,
Mhm.
and it's on Amazon. So please order the book. Part of the proceeds do go to the nonprofit to help us reunite a child with their relatives. It will give you a lot of information about the foster care system, its problems, its solutions, and stories of hope
Mhm.
that will inspire. Also, they can go to our website at Forever Homes for FOR fosterkids.org,
Mhm.
and they can donate there. They can also find us on Facebook. They can donate there, and they can be part of the conversation. We talk about many topics, and this is a place for people to learn. I can't tell you how many potential foster parents and adoptive parents we have given information to,
Wow.
sometimes down to here's the phone number for your county. Call them up.
Mhm.
Here are their hours.
Mhm.
That kind of service. It's not our job, but you know what? It is our job, because if we get one more person to be a foster parent or adopt a child, again, we have done our work and done it well. And so we will do that outreach to help anybody. And that's what we're here for.
That's awesome. Well, on behalf of our audience, thank you. Heartfelt thanks for all you do, and as well as your agency. And it's a privilege. It's a privilege to hear about all this, and an open invitation. Reach into your heart and ask yourself, how can I get involved? And we'll leave the links in the show notes so our listeners can reach out to you.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's been a pleasure. And I just will ask that everyone think about it, reach into their heart, as you said, and think of a way that they could help.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you again.
You're so welcome.